Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we are going to be continuing to read The Sleeper Awakes by H.G. Wells. So, let's get going. He saw the councillors first afar off in the glare of one of the temporary lights that marked their path, a little group of white figures in a black archway. In the council house they had been in darkness. He watched them approaching, drawing nearer past first this blazing electric star, and then that. The minatory roar of the crowd over whom their power had lasted for 150 years marched along beside them. As they drew still nearer, their faces came out, weary, white, and anxious. He saw them blinking up through the glare about him and Ostrog. He contrasted their strange, cold looks in the hall of Atlas. Presently he could recognize several of them. The man who had rapped the table at Howard, a burly man with a red beard, and one delicate-featured, short, dark man with a particularly long skull. He noted that two were whispering together and looking behind him at Ostrog. Next there came a tall, dark, and handsome man, walking downcast. Abruptly he glanced up. His eyes touched Graham for a moment and passed beyond him, to Ostrog. The way that had been made for them was so contrived that they had to march past and curve about before they came to the sloping path of planks that ascended to the stage where their surrender was to be made. "The Master! The Master! God and the Master!" shouted the people. "To hell with the council!" Graham looked at their multitudes, receding beyond counting into a shouting haze, and then at Ostrog beside him, white and steadfast and still. His eye went again to the little group of white councillors, and then he looked up at the familiar quiet stars overhead. The marvellous element in his fate was suddenly vivid. Could that be his indeed, that little life in his memory, 200 years gone by, and this as well? Chapter 14. From the Crow's Nest. And so, after strange delays and through an avenue of doubt and battle, this man from the 19th century came at last to his position at the head of that complex world. At first, when he rose from the long deep sleep that followed his rescue and the surrender of the council, he did not recognize his surroundings. By an effort he gained a clue in his mind, and all that had happened came back to him, at first with a quality of insincerity, like a story heard, like something read out of a book. And even before his memories were clear, the exultation of his escape, the wonder of his prominence were back in his mind. He was owner of the world, master of the earth. This new great age was in the completest sense his. He no longer hoped to discover his experience as a dream. He became anxious now to convince himself that they were real. An obsequious valet assisted him to dress under the direction of a dignified chief attendant, a little man whose face proclaimed him Japanese, albeit he spoke English like an Englishman. From the latter he learnt something of the state of affairs. Already the revolution was an accepted fact. Already business was being resumed throughout the city. Abroad the downfall of the council had been received for the most part with delight. Nowhere was the council popular, and the 1,000 cities of Western America, after 200 years, still jealous of New York, London, and the East, had risen almost unanimously 2 days before at the news of Graham's imprisonment. Paris was fighting within itself. The rest of the world hung in suspense. While he was breaking his fast, the sound of a telephone bell jetted from a corner, and his chief attendant called his attention to the voice of Ostrog, making polite inquiries. Graham interrupted his refreshment to reply. Very shortly Lincoln arrived, and Graham at once expressed a strong desire to talk to people and to be shown more of the new life that was opening before him. Lincoln informed him that in 3 hours' time a representative gathering of officials and their wives would be held in the state apartments of the Wind Vane chief. Graham's desire to traverse the ways of the city was, however, at present impossible, because of the enormous excitement of the people. It was, however, quite possible for him to take a bird's-eye view of the city from the crow's nest of the Wind Vane keeper. To this, accordingly, Graham was conducted by his attendant. Lincoln, with a graceful compliment to the attendant, apologized for not accompanying them, on account of the present pressure of administrative work. Higher even than the most gigantic windwheels hung this crow's nest, a clear 1,000 feet above the roofs, a little disc-shaped speck on a spear of metallic filigree, cable-stayed. To its summit Graham was drawn in a little wire-hung cradle. Halfway down the frail-seeming stem was a light gallery, about which hung a cluster of tubes. Minute they looked from above, rotating slowly on the ring of its outer rail. These were the specula, en rapport, with the Wind Vane keeper's mirrors, in one of which Ostrog had shown him the coming of his rule. His Japanese attendant ascended before him, and they spent nearly an hour asking and answering questions. It was a day full of the promise and quality of spring. The touch of the wind warmed. The sky was an intense blue, and the vast expanse of London shone dazzling under the morning sun. The air was clear of smoke and haze, sweet as the air of a mountain glen. Save for the irregular oval of ruins about the house of the council and the black flag of the surrender that fluttered there, the mighty city seen from above showed few signs of the swift revolution that had, to his imagination, in one night and one day, changed the destinies of the world. A multitude of people still swarmed over these ruins, and the huge open-work stagings in the distance, from which started in times of peace the service of aeroplanes to the various great cities of Europe and America, were also black with the victors. Across a narrow way of planking raised on trestles that crossed the ruins, a crowd of workmen were busy restoring the connection between the cables and wires of the council house and the rest of the city, preparatory to the transfer thither of Ostrog's headquarters from the Wind Vane buildings. For the rest, the luminous expanse was undisturbed. So vast was its serenity in comparison with the areas of disturbance, that presently Graham, looking beyond them, could almost forget the thousands of men lying out of sight in the artificial glare within the quasi-subterranean labyrinth, dead or dying of the overnight wounds. Forget the improvised wards with the hosts of surgeons, nurses and bearers feverishly busy. Forget, indeed, all the wonder, consternation and novelty under the electric lights. Down there in the hidden ways of the ant-hill he knew that the revolution triumphed, that black everywhere carried the day. Black favours, black banners, black festoons across the streets. And out here, under the fresh sunlight, beyond the crater of the fight, as if nothing had happened to the earth, the forest of wind vanes that had grown from one or two while the council had ruled, roared peacefully upon their incessant duty. Far away, spiked, jagged and indented by the wind vanes, the Surrey hills rose blue and faint. To the north and nearer, the sharp contours of Highgate and Muswell Hill were similarly jagged. And all over the countryside he knew, on every crest and hill, where once the hedges had interlaced, and cottages, churches, inns, and farmhouses had nestled among their trees, windwheels similar to those he saw, and bearing, like them, vast advertisements, gaunt and distinctive symbols of the new age, cast their whirling shadows and stored incessantly the energy that flowed away incessantly through all the arteries of the city. And underneath these wandered the countless flocks and herds of the British Food Trust, his property, with their lonely guards and keepers. And with that we come to the end of the episode. So I will say thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon or night. No matter what time of day it is, I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.